Thank you, Abby. Just really keen to speak with you and get your feedback on how things are going. Certainly with industry placements. So if I just do some quick kind of housekeeping. Next slide, please, Abby. So obviously we're going to record this session. I've just explained that. Any questions that you've got if people are speaking, please use the chat function, although we will be shutting this PowerPoint down shortly so we can actually see each other speaking, because there's nothing really on the PowerPoint at all. But if you've got any questions that you want to ask, we can either ask them directly or put them into the chat, please. So the topics for discussion today are going to be around pre-placement and on-placement challenges and kind of mitigations and solutions, and about sharing good practice. So hopefully this will be a really vibrant and dynamic conversation today, and see if things have changed since we spoke last. So with no further ado, I will pass you over to Tabitha and Sunday. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So
you're welcome.
Yeah, so you can hear me. That's good to hear. Okay. Really appreciate you joining us here today, colds and all. We know it's a busy time for you, so appreciate your time. We've kind of gathered you in particular around this virtual table because we know that you are coastal rural providers who have some access issues, and we know that you've spoken to your T-level lead and the guys at the AOC about this, and you have some ongoing issues. And so, we do recognise that we've spoken to you about this before, but the context has changed a little bit within the past 6 months. We've got a new ministerial team after a summer of many changes at the top. We've got loads more T-level providers delivering as of this September. We know that CDF being phased out is going to have some impact on you guys, and also the cost of living crisis is undoubtedly going to have an impact on access to placements. Just by way of policy advice, we had hoped to be in a better position, or a position to be able to tell you about some policy changes. What can I say here? Yet to be announced, but we do have an announcement that is imminent, and we hope to tell you more before Christmas. So and we are hoping that this will have a positive impact on some of the issues that you guys are facing around rurality. So anyway, picking up this conversation again, it's a good time to kind of start building our evidence base, looking ahead to the next SR, and where the key pressure points are now in the short term, what we can do, or what support we can put in place to help you in the short term, and then also the longer term challenges, with you guys scaling up your provision over the coming years. So as Peter mentioned, we intend to split this session into two. We're looking at pre-placement and on-placement challenges. So essentially means sourcing placements and then sort of getting your students to the workplace. And then we're also looking at pre-placement and on-placement solutions. So what works well? How have you been mitigating these circumstances and helping your students get to placements? How you've been networking with your employers and building up your employer database? So this is like your opportunity to share your experiences, to help identify solutions and good practice. This will be interactive, so long as we can get the WYSI IT to work. This is where I will hand over to Tabitha to start us off on the first part of the session. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Peter. So I have just popped in the chat a link to a Lucid board. If everyone could please click on that link, and I'm really hoping that this works, and if not, I can share my screen and we can try and do it kind of manually. You might need to just register for a free account if you haven't used Lucid before. So I'm just going to give everyone a moment. I will be able to see when people are kind of popping up into the Lucid board. So please do let me know if you've got any issues logging into that.
Tabitha, just so you know, I don't know if you've seen on your screen that Connie has just joined. So yeah, I don't. If you've got any questions, please just let us know either in the chat or if you want to turn your microphone on and ask.
Hi, Connie.
Hello, sorry, I had a nightmare with Zoom. I
No,
don't know
not
what's going on.
at all. Perfect. I can see some coming through on Lucid now. Perfect. If anyone has any issues, then either just drop it in the chat. And I think, Cindy, if you wouldn't mind just checking if any comments come up in the chat, or just shout out, and we can take it from there.
Sorry, can
Yes,
I just ask, is there a way to sort of split your screen so that we can see the Lucid board alongside people's faces, or is that not possible?
yes, I mean, I could share my screen if you like, and then we'll just see people's faces at the top. Would that work?
Okay, would that be helpful for people? I think that flicking from one to the next might be a bit tricky.
Yeah, no problem at all. Let me share my screen and see if this works. Can you see the right screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So basically Lucid is a really kind of quick summary. It's just a really helpful collaboration tool. These are some little sticky notes that we have that you can write in. You can kind of drag them into the appropriate box. If you'd like to create a new sticky note, then you can click on this little sticky note icon, just click on a sticky note and then click again and it will drop it into the board. To kind of navigate around the board, the easiest way to do it is on this little selector tool, top left of the menu. If you click on the hand, that basically allows you to kind of grab and move around. And then you should be able to click into your post-it notes and start typing. So if we start by focusing this discussion on the challenges, so pre-placement and on-placement, it would be really brilliant if people could start writing some thoughts on some post-it notes, dragging them into the boxes, and then we'll use that as a bit of a starter for 10 for our discussion today. So you should be able to just kind of click into the post-it note and start typing straight away. Sorry, Connie. Yes, so you might need to register for a free account. Hopefully, I've just reshared the link as well in case you're struggling. Some really interesting thoughts coming in so far. So employers within travel distance, and be really interested to kind of hear about what feels like a reasonable length time commute that students would typically be willing to have to get to or from an industry placement.
It would also be useful to know, in terms of travel costs, how they fund this, whether you have support in place to support students, or whether it's their parents that support them, the kind of travel costs that we're referring to here.
I'd be really interested as well to kind of hear, and I think this is maybe something that we can come on to in a bit. Obviously, some of these challenges are kind of universal challenges across the board and potentially not specific to access and to rural and coastal situations. And so some of those broader challenges we can maybe tackle at the end if we have time. Yeah, really interesting point about the fact that students can't drive, or certainly not immediately when they start their T levels. I don't know if who's kind of put the post-it notes back on in terms of like travel costs and employers within travel distance. It would be great if you wouldn't mind maybe coming off mute and just explaining a bit more around what feels like a reasonable cost and equally what feels like a reasonable travel time.
Of course.
Yes, I'm happy to start with that. So I put the one about travel costs for students. Being in Norwich, we have quite a lot of places that are a little bit rural to us. And although we have a good bus system, for any students like who are doing a construction site, which obviously varies quite a lot, any engineering companies, that kind of thing, the travel can be quite restrictive because it might be a matter of one bus in, one bus out. So that's always fun anyway. But also a lot of students just can't afford that extra bus fare. They might be on a first bus, for example, to get to the college, but they might need a Sanders bus to get to their placement. So then they're having to buy multiple bus tickets. And although we try to get it so that their placement is on the same route or within the same company as their would use for their own bus passes anyway, it's just not always possible. And we found as well that especially now that the bursary costs and stuff like that have slightly changed, it actually means that less students are eligible for it, which is quite unfortunate at the moment. So there's a lot of different cost issues, but we tend to say if students can get somewhere within an hour, that's quite reasonable for distance wise.
Okay.
Yes, I'd agree with Marie. And that's, yeah, the what did I write? Employers within the travel distance. So yeah, what might seem a reasonable commute time to us, actually, when a student's getting on a bus, and here in Somerset, it takes a good hour and a half to get between towns, and it might only be our travel distance of about 11 miles, but because the nature of the bus is that it goes all around the houses, those students are often sitting, they're having to leave their houses at 7 o'clock in the morning to get to college on time. So then you add on the pressure of going to an employer. And it does concern me that, these late or the dark evenings, it gets dark so early now that when you've got students out there who are perhaps working in industry till 5:30, if they miss one bus home, the nature of it here in Somerset is that there's one bus every hour. There isn't multiple buses, and sometimes in some areas it's one bus a day, and so if the student misses that bus, it's a big problem. They can't actually get to their placement or to college at times, and that's obviously been impacted by all the industrial action as well this year. So it has really been very difficult.
I just wanted to add to that as well. Being in Suffolk, I mean, you've just touched on it, but we have villages where there's literally, one bus a day. We have an example. We have 5 students that go to BT. BT is an amazing opportunity to have an industry placement there. But some of these students are having to just to get there alone, they're having to get a bus into the town, and then from town they get the train to Ipswich, and then from Ipswich they then get a shuttle bus to Dastrel Park, and that's just the morning commute. We then have to contribute towards a taxi for them to get from their placement to the train station to get the only train that they can possibly get home in order to catch their last bus. And we have had it where the taxi hasn't shown up or they're late coming out. They then missed their train, and we've had a nightmare in trying to get them home because some of them live 50, 60, sort of 70-minute drive from their placement, and their parents can't afford it, or they don't drive, or it's really difficult. We're also seeing the cost of it, obviously, as you can imagine, the cost of everything at the moment. Students are literally like, I cannot afford to get to my placement.
Who's funding that, Connie?
That's not something that I sort of deal with, the funding side of it. So I wouldn't be able to tell you, unfortunately. But it is really tricky for us, and we're also getting students that are living in the local villages. They don't get enough transport, and like, for example, science T-levels, our main science employers are in Cambridge, but we've got students that are literally cannot get to Cambridge and stuff, so it is really difficult when it comes to travel for us being in our rural area, and like you've already touched on, Louise, about buses and how often they come, and with the train strikes and everything, it's been an absolute nightmare, to be honest.
And I suppose that cost point becomes more important as placement numbers scale up, and it becomes more prohibitive to fund things like taxis. Absolutely,
it's costing the students sort of 25, 30 pound a day, which is a lot of money, especially when they're having to now give up their part-time jobs or not work their part-time jobs on their days off because they've got to do their industry placement.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good point, actually. We've found, especially this year, a lot more of our students have got part-time jobs, which unfortunately aren't in the area that complements their placement. So they're having to do an industry placement in addition to their jobs. But they're not all able to just be like, yeah, that's fine, I'll do that on the weekends, or I just won't do my job, because a lot of them are now contributing to the household because all the bills have gone up. So it is, it's very, very difficult to be a young person at the moment, especially financially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And are you finding their part-time hours kind of clashing with any kind of planned placement hours, like within the sort of, right?
We've had a student that for additional reasons has not been able to get to his placement at time, so he's having to make up his hours to reach that, and he's having to stop doing his part-time job, and he is in a situation where he has to contribute to the bills at home,
right?
So it's really tricky.
We've had it occasionally where it's kind of mixed in, where they've had to basically not do one of their working days so that they can do a placement day. But our biggest one at the moment is the fact that they're, especially if they're doing a course like childcare, for example, then they're doing their 2 days at placement, their 3 days at college, and then they're doing 2 days in the work environment over on the weekend. So the poor kids are literally working 7 days a week, and most adults don't even do that. Plus, in addition to their self-study and things like that. So it's, there's a lot of things to consider right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested on some of these kind of employer network building ones in this pre-placement section. So getting employers on board with placements, maybe employers that previously had access to the kind of incentive payments. Would you say that there are particular challenges from a rural and coastal perspective that you are facing in building employer networks?
Yeah, well, that one was my one about the incentive fund. That one was basically because with our construction employers, they use that incentive fund for things like PPE and getting the CSCS cards. For childcare, they used it to get the students their DBSs. Some of them used it to help the student get there through their travel and pay for their lunch. We had the digital ones use it to get actual laptops so that they could set the students up with the right software and everything like that. So without that access, they're basically saying to us, we can't afford to do that now. So it's, we're losing potentially 2 or 3 placements with one company because that, and that they knew that it was a temporary thing. But knowing that it was temporary doesn't always help the reality of the fact that it's now not here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was just that foot in the door. It was just that especially with digital being as hard as it was, I just think given, like I said, that incentive, to saying about the other comments about the laptop and that, it helped one of our employers buy a couple of laptops so they could take on a few more students. So it just really helped. Obviously now we're going to our first years for digital again. There's more of them, and obviously it's going to be interesting to see how we get the placements on board this time.
And do you think it helps particularly because they were maybe smaller firms because of your geographic location? I suppose what I'm trying to draw out here is we absolutely recognise that there are kind of broader challenges, but we are trying to, I suppose, hone in on where those challenges have a specific rural or coastal angle to them, so that if we are able to go to Treasury and ask for specific funding, because it feels unlikely that there would be kind of broad brush funding, just given the kind of economic climate. Obviously, we are continuing conversations with Treasury, but where we could do things that are more targeted towards specific groups, we might have more success with that. So trying to think about whether that was because typically in rural areas, it's more SMEs rather than larger firms, and therefore there's a greater need for them to kind of provide laptops because they won't already have access to company-wide IT equipment. Things like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We've had it with an employer where they were going to use the funding to buy additional IT equipment to enable the students to sort of hone in on some different aspects of their T-level. And because of the travel, they've now used it to contribute towards the students' travel expenses.
Okay, that's really helpful.
So, or because they're not paying them, because it's obviously optional to pay the students and none of us are choosing to pay them, some of them have decided that they've now noticed obviously the impact it has on travel and them not working and part-time jobs and stuff, and they've used it towards like a gift card for the students at the end of the placement. But that wasn't their original intention. Their original intention was to use it to buy additional resources for those students. So you could maybe argue that the student hasn't had the experiences they planned to, or the employer originally planned them to get to them, because they're having to use it for things like travel or a thank you or whatever that might be.
I think with the rurality and digital placements, I think that's the big one for me, is the digital, particularly the software, the design and production software. You know, we don't have many, and I know it's about thinking outside the box and going to like a builder's and saying, you've got an IT department, you know, can you take a digital student? I know all of that and I've done that, but I think the employer incentive did help those companies to kind of take on board and kind of put themselves out a little bit, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
To take those learners. You know, I thought of every single thing. I'm really worried about our newest cohort of digital production learners, because they're huge, and you know, we've got support as well, and I'm not so worried about finding digital support, you know, because of school technicians and things like that, IT, but it's that software. We just don't have those companies here locally, so we're having to really think outside the box. So, you know, I'm kind of hoping that something will come through or some ideas about how you can support, or give us ideas, colleges ideas about how we can like set up, you know, kind of companies for learners to do their placements with an employer. But I know that we can't do remote work, and I understand that. But like, I'm trying to think how I can get learners through. I've got 2 learners for T levels who are on year 2, and I've still got not got them placed digital. You know, I'm losing sleep about this. We've tried knocking on doors, even Chamber of Commerce, big companies. The big companies are the worst probably, because they've got so much security. They won't let learners anywhere near their software. And so even when we try and say about project work, or you know, that's kind of, and they don't care about money, if I'm being honest, that, you know, £1,000 won't help them, but it does help some of the smaller businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. More of an impact on maybe those SMEs or sole traders that really need the funding.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry,
Gail, I just can't help myself. But have you started to link with some of the SME partners that DfE have engaged to help find? So have you worked with My Pocket Skills yet?
Yeah, they haven't come through with anything of any use at the moment.
Okay.
And you know, because sometimes they'll come, or when we've had this before, something will come through, but it is just too far away for our learners to travel.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I mean, we've got Hinkley Point C here, and they were offering a digital placement. Now that's in Bridgewater, we're in Yeovil. That's an hour and a half of nasty journey.
Yeah.
You know, and when we had that fog the other night, one of my team went to Hinkley Point C,
Mm.
and I would not want a learner driving back all the way to and down country lanes and things. You know, they had a digital placement, and none of our learners would go for it just because, you know,
location.
yeah.
Okay.
I think we've also had to consider and I think you touched on this, Louise, about the long working days. These students are knackered. We've had to cut down hours at one of our employers for some of our students because they were doing a 9 till 5. They were traveling 2 hours either side of it. That's not right.
I wouldn't do that as an adult,
no,
let alone an unpaid student. I think we've really got to look at what we're asking our students to do. And when we're asked, you know, and as in this cost of living crisis, which is affecting everybody, you know, working 7 days a week between college, your part-time job, which some students are doing 30 hours in McDonald's, and that is a full-time job in itself. You know, 30 hours at full-time employment according to the government, but so many students are doing that to support themselves, support their families, just to live. You know, they've got driving lessons to pay for, they've got mobile phone bills to pay, they've got clothes to pay, you know, all the things that come with being a teenager, and then we want them to work unpaid for a day as well. It's too much.
I think we're in a different situation, aren't we, because we are rural. We have very few employers, so when these employers are coming on board, these students know that that's probably one of the only opportunities they're going to get.
Yeah.
And they've tried contacting places themselves. We ask our students to go out and seek placements because it's another way of us trying to generate new employers.
Mm-hmm.
And so students are desperate as well, and they are going out, and it's just
and then using their own money to pay for travel to go to a placement that they're not paid for. It is, you know, I've had parents on the phone getting quite cross about it. It's, you know, we've got a duty of care to our young people, and at the moment it feels like that's not the first and foremost, you know, in our aims. And also, just adding on to what Pete said about those partner companies, I've had a couple of leads, and one was in Portishead in Bristol, which is miles away, and the other was in Honiton in Devon, which again is miles away. And they should have gone to South Devon College for a start. We can't, you know, Honiton is in Devon, so you're crossing borders. It's a different bus company. There's no train station in Honiton. And the gentleman I spoke to at the bakery who'd inquired about hosting a business administration T-level placement said that when he spoke to the lady on the phone, he had explained that actually Bridgewater and Taunton College was quite far away from him, but she hadn't really taken that on board because she was based in London, is looking at a map, or as the crow flies, it's only X amount of miles, but that just doesn't translate in the rural areas. It's, you know, as I said, the buses don't, you would have to get 2 or 3 buses to get there, and it's just not feasible. They're going to arrive at midday.
Yeah.
Okay. That was supply chain, was it, Louise? For business admin?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Actually, I think that's a really interesting piece of feedback.
Yeah, and I think
I will pass that back.
It's not a negative against them as such. It's just an observation that when you're in London or a city, your transport links are much better and much more frequent. Whereas here, you know, that one bus every hour, which sometimes doesn't turn up, turns into one bus every 2 hours or one bus a day. It just doesn't compute.
I'll have a word with Sarah actually, because it's constructive feedback and they're really on board for that. So
I did feedback to Sarah. Okay. Actually, she sent me an email,
but
but there was, it doesn't, you know, what you think is actually quite a manageable commute in a city is quite different outside of those areas.
Okay.
And actually, those young people who are travelling in excess of an hour and a half each way, you know, I know it doesn't help, and it's not especially great for the individuals doing all this traveling, but we have said in the delivery guidance, where students are traveling more than an hour each way, that can then be deducted from their daily hours, so they don't have to put in a full day once they get there. The little things like that could help. And I just wonder if there's anything that you are doing to kind of spread out the hours to kind of make it more manageable for these students who are potentially doing part-time hours as well as their big chunky qualification as well. I mean, does that help? Are employers accommodating that, or is it due to how it's being set in the curriculum that your hands are tied?
I think with some curriculum areas where, like, say, childcare, they've been doing placements for always, they've always done significant placements, and that seems to work quite well. And I think the curriculum do design their courses so that the hours are spread out, like maybe throughout the academic year, 1 day a week, and actually it's spread out over a couple of years or whatever. I think it's just where we're struggling to get placements, and then you're getting yourself backed into a corner. You're running out of time. For me personally, that's my problem. But I think working with your curriculum in terms of timetabling is really, really important to kind of make sure that we do get those placements spread out. And obviously I do try and use, where possible, paid work, just to kind of, when we talk to students at enrollment and when they're looking to come and talk, come and see us about or applying for the course, we always say, look, if you're looking to get a part-time job, because lots of school leavers are, and you're looking to do sort of a health T level or whatever, maybe consider working in a care home, or we try and map it across as much as possible, to sort of, so that they aren't doing those 7 days a week. But that doesn't always work in every area, but where it's all possible, we try and do that. Is kind of makes things a lot easier for them.
That's really useful, and I think that's probably quite a nice segue onto some of the solutions. And I think there's quite a lot of kind of crossover, I think we saw in the challenges between pre-placement and on-placement. So it doesn't feel like it fits neatly into one box or the other, then don't worry about it. But I think that's a really interesting point about encouraging kind of relevant part-time work. And that is something that we are looking really seriously at in the new delivery approaches, which Cindy mentioned earlier, that we are hoping to announce imminently, to try and make that a little bit easier, because we are really conscious, as the discussion has been leading, the cost of living crisis combined with students wanting kind of part-time jobs and needing them and contributing to the family income is really challenging at the moment.
I mean, we've also got it where, because we're relying on sole traders, all your smaller companies, especially with the sort of sole traders, they don't have employers' liability insurance. They don't have a DBS.
Okay.
And that's an additional cost, which we were lucky enough last year to have some funding through ESF. Our team supported that with general work placements as well for us, because that, again, I would say, I know it's not T-level based, but we are sort of doing work placements as well to generate those employer links and connections in preparation for more T-levels. And we were lucky enough to get some funding to assist, but we're looking at, for some of these sole traders, having to pay sort of over £100 for employers' liability insurance, which for one person is so much money to be asking, and then saying, oh, can you get a DBS check as well, which is 50 quid. That's a lot, and they're spending a lot of their time, aren't they, as well? So that's something that we have had an issue with, and I think as more sort of T-levels come out, and being in a rural area and things, we are relying on those employers as well as sort of our larger employers, and that's definitely an additional cost that we have to consider.
So can I, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Oh no, I was just asking, if we were to hand over £150 to these employers, would that mitigate that one? Would that then bring about an opportunity for a student?
My argument would probably be, if there's money to do that for those employers, can every employer get that £200 or £150? Because in my opinion, it's maybe not fair on, I don't know, a local company that has 5 employees that will have ELI and doesn't require a DBS to not get that funding, where they could actually use it for something else like IT equipment, because they are a small company and they can't afford it. So that would, I think that might actually in the long term maybe cause some wider issues when employers are researching into T levels and they're seeing that, oh, if you're a sole trader, you will get this funding, but if you're not, then you can't.
Yeah, I find there's a problem with insurance across the board at the moment as well, because we've had a few instances where students do have vocationally relevant part-time work, but the employer has said because of their insurance, they cannot allow them to use those hours as work placement.
Okay.
And we've also had the
Okay.
issue where we've had charities who have students who volunteer, and that's fine, they don't need employer's liability, but as soon as you say it's work placement or industry placement, that charity then requires ELI and can't pay, and obviously can't buy it just for that one student. So it is, I don't know if there's been changes made in the insurance industry or to the guidelines about placements and work experience, but there's definitely something afoot out there that wasn't
there is,
there a couple of years ago.
We've been doing a lot of work on that recently, so I do have some links and stuff. If I can find them, I'll put them in the chat of where we've got the exact wording, because we've found the wording where it doesn't require an ELI, and that's if you're a step sibling, for example, or a grandparent, you also don't require ELI. But we found the actual sort of legal documentation that stipulates when you need an ELI and when you don't. What we have found really difficult is the legal requirements when it comes to DBSs. Because it's actually, when you look into it and research it a lot, it's they should have or they could have a DBS. It's not they must have, or so we have had some issues around sort of the DBS side of it. But ELI, if I've got some links, I'll definitely put them in the chat.
But I feel that there's been changes made, and like we said, we've had a helicopter museum who are a registered charity. We have an engineering student who volunteers there, but he can't use that as a place as industry placement for his T level because they won't have the ELI in place, because once he is changed from being a volunteer to a work placement student, their insurance changes.
That's
Yeah, because
interesting.
I think students, on work placement or an industry placement, for the purposes of the ELI, they are meant to be treated as employees, aren't they? But it's kind of not really the case, is it? Yeah, it's a tricky one.
And also, just some employers, I don't know. We're trying to do some research ourselves, but it seems to be the larger employers, certainly the retailers, who are saying no, they can't use that as a placement. They can come and do unpaid work experience, but when it's their part-time job, that's then detracting from the reason we're trying to having a.
Yeah, I mean that's I don't really understand that point, because that they will have employers' liability insurance already for their employees. They would just extend it for the student doing the industry placement with them. So I don't really understand. There's obviously something more in it there that I don't really have a grasp of. So it'd be good to get to the bottom of that one.
We've not actually come across that as an issue. It's not been raised with us as a team.
Right, it's something that we've come up against a few times in the past few months now. Of this another company have said no. The student has a part-time job with the company. We deemed it vocationally relevant, but the employer says no. My insurance states we can't host work experience. Let them allow use their working hours. It's this terminology of working hours and industry placement. It's one or the other. They can't do both.
I suppose it's different for smaller firms as well, because we know that in NHS organisations where there have been issues with insurance, they've been able to actually just get their HR team to speak to the insurance companies, and they've enacted changes in policies based on requirements. But that's obviously more challenging if you have a smaller firm that maybe is not quite as able to do so.
Sandy and Tabitha, there's two things that appeared on the right-hand side for challenges that we've not covered yet. We've spoken around travel, we've looked at funding, spoken about some of the consequences of the insurance and DBS, but there's two on it. There's one with, we're hearing this as well, with students' mental health off the back of the pandemic increasing for you guys. And there's also somebody put on a comment about some industries still requiring COVID vaccines, and some young people haven't had them. I don't know if it's worth expanding on those two.
Yeah, definitely happy to expand on those two. Although I will say, I wouldn't say that those are specific to
They're
rural.
not specific, no.
So I think just to kind of loosely touch on those. So I think mental health, absolutely. We hear that, although I suspect students' mental health is probably, regardless of what qualification they are studying, I wouldn't say that's unique to T levels. And you know, it would definitely be something maybe that we can, Peter, think about more in terms of provide a support package if there's more that could be done there. But I wouldn't have said that specifically T levels or industry placements or to do with access. Sorry, just to try and keep this a really focused discussion.
No problem.
And on vaccinations and things like that, and we see that a lot more in health. Obviously, that's an employer's choice as to if they would like to do that, and that's not really something that we could intervene on. From a kind of, you know, health placements perspective, there's something about, and I think someone's mentioned it before, about being like open and honest with students about expectations, requirements are likely to be, so kind of starting those conversations as early as possible if there are likely to be vaccinations that are required. Similarly, I suppose where we see it on health, and if there are concerns where students don't want to have vaccinations for all sorts of reasons, then it's a conversation with those kind of occupational health teams and that employer to see if they would make an exception on a case-by-case basis. And I suppose particularly where there's vaccinations with a cost associated to them. So obviously a COVID vaccine you get for free, but on health placements we're thinking about like Hep B and stuff like that, where we know there are costs associated. So yeah, again, it definitely something that we are aware of and kind of thinking about. Is limited in solutions for that at this stage.
Okay.
So can I just go back to, because I guess the whole thing with the rural placements, I guess, is, and I'm just going to hark on about digital because clearly that's the thing that's bothering me most. You know, thinking about who we've got in the room here in terms of what you can actually do. I mean, is there something that you can do in terms of looking at getting, you know, big companies, large organizations who develop digital software, for example, to kind of support learners? And I know that we can't do remote, but can we start thinking outside the box about what realistically is going to work? Because, you know, the way the world is going, students, our cohorts are becoming huge for these kind of courses, and we're a victim of our own success in a way, because, you know, we've got loads of learners wanting to come onto these digital courses and then trying to find them T-level placements. We're going to have to get into the situation where we won't be able to accept them onto it because we simply can't find the placements. So it's such a fantastic opportunity, you know. Can we, if we can't get them to these placements because of where we are, can we do something, think outside the box about getting employers to them and setting up employment hubs, or, you know, I don't know, I'm just trying to think, but this is kind of where my head's going at the moment, because we can't fund travel to them, you know, we can't get learners on a bus. And also, if I did get them on a bus, I'd probably be nicking Louise's placements. Sorry, Louise.
You're very welcome, Gail.
I think the word's collaborating, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
It's every man for himself. It's every man for himself when it comes down to placements. I don't know, not really, but you know what I mean.
Gail, you can bring them over and I'll drive them home.
Yeah.
Is that something that could be considered within sort of the 35 hours, you know, that they can use additionally for preparation for their industry placements, you know, when they have interviews and stuff? I completely agree with Gail. Like, if it's not just for the mental health of the students not getting the placement, it's the mental health of all of the staff that have this sort of cloud over their head that if these students don't go out on placement, they have wasted 2 years of the course because they're not going to get their qualification because there are no placements out there. and it is that, you know, we're going to have to just start declining students, which none of us want to do. So yeah, is there stuff around sort of that 35 hours and maybe extending that a bit more if we get to a point that at some point in the year they still don't have a placement? Is there other options that we can use to maybe build their hours up?
Are you talking particularly in the sort of remote field, like you know, where access is an issue?
I think we've got to look at remote, in my
Yeah.
opinion. It just seems silly, you know. We've got companies that can't afford bills because of the energy cost or something. Their staff are working from home, well then they're not traveling in, or something we've all had to consider as staff is our petrol that we get for going out to visit these employers. That's now because of the cost of living. That's not so. I think there's so many additional things that I think we need to consider. But remote, you can do remote mock sort of assessment days, can't you, and things like that will still give students amazing experience, but they can do it from home.
It's a skill that people are going to need for the future as well. And, you know, we're being a bit naive if we think, oh, you know, everything's going to be office based, and especially digital. You know, most digital companies, you know, big companies down here have digital teams. Those teams are working from home. You know, the T level was designed by employers in collaboration with employers. So can those employers, you know, provide projects for the students to do, you know, if it's a simulated work environment, you know, for those that are really concerned about having to do the 315 hours by the end of the academic year. And obviously Gail has saturated the local area to source those placements. Could we then, you know, are those employers who were consulted on the design of the T level, are they still contactable? Are they still working with the DfE?
I think some of them definitely are, and I think it's a really good point, and it's something that, so one of our kind of things that we've been suggesting to ministers in our proposals is something that's not totally dissimilar to that, on a kind of small team or kind of involving employers in that kind of, almost like when we had the temporary flexibility, there was an employer set project, you know, opportunities for trying to bring groups of either employers or students together, and definitely take the point about remote. And it's something that our ministerial team are not particularly keen on, particularly our new Secretary of State. She has quite strong views about work placements being done in person, but we obviously have put the case to her that in certain sectors, that's just not the way that industries operate anymore, and employers definitely aren't in the office 5 days a week. And we are hoping for some movement on that. I definitely don't think it will be loads and loads. We're not going to get 100% remote placements, but even something, you know, a small concession in that space, I think would probably be really helpful. Definitely.
Because I think, and I know who you exactly what you mean, because I've sat in another meeting and she got a bit shirty anyway. But I think, sorry, but you know, I think the point is missed that actually most of these learners have employability skills. You know, they do go out to the workplace. I mean, I've read the guidance for T levels back to front, trying to find how I can make this work for my 2 digital learners in particular. And I now know that actually I can try and take them through to the end of October with their placement if I need to, if I get backed into a corner. That's how desperate I am. You know, so if I'm, you know, and we're reading like what happens to this learner through no fault of their own if I can't get them a placement. That's kind of on me, but like I don't know what else to do, because we can't have internal placements and things. And you know, if it's just the digital software, and even speaking to digital employers, they don't have, you know, all of their software development is done centrally. Not in an office. They buy in that service, and a lot of them actually do their digital you know, technical roles in terms of they get someone to come in. So you know, I just kind of like really don't know what to do. But we'll keep trying, and that's probably the only negative thing I really have to worry about. You know, everything else is going really well. Business is looking good, you know, the business C-level and things. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but it's just this one.
And I think that's what we're seeing, is that it's not across the board, it's always going to be subject specific, and you know, that's where different sectors work in different ways. I suppose outside of digital, how have you found getting students to, for example, construction or engineering or manufacturing? Because I suppose we're thinking about kind of agriculture and kind of animal care and what that looks like. Have you tended, I mean, at any point have you kind of funded minibuses? Have you, I know somebody earlier mentioned kind of taxis from the station or to the station from the employer. Has anybody else had any kind of experience of directly funding transport?
We have paid for students' travel to placements, for using the bursary where needed. We're just starting construction this year, and we've only got quite a small cohort, so, and they're electrical, so I'm quite confident with our local, and they're all being put through their CSCS cards and all of that sort of thing. That's all being sorted for them. So I think that one will be all right. And engineering we've got next year, so, and we are quite engineering heavy for you know, we've got the town. I'm hopeful that will be okay. So, but in terms of we have used bursary to travel to pay for transport, or even pay sometimes where it's low income families for parents to pick students up, paid for their petrol, using the same kind of claim form that staff use.
Gail, can I just ask, are you doing the electrical engineering? Are you doing that one?
It's
That's
got a
technical.
Yeah.
Have you found that one okay? It's just that when I've been speaking to curriculum, they're very much apprenticeship route, and they were saying, you know, they should really do apprenticeship, they shouldn't do T-level. And I just wondered, do you know what the prior learning would be if they did the T-level?
Yeah, I mean, our lecturer is pretty hot on it, to be fair. So he's
really?
kind of
Okay.
gone through the whole, I can contact you after, because he's gone through all the whole scheme of work sort of thing and put what the learner would do with an employer.
Right. I think he was at another meeting the other day, actually. He was really like positive about it. So yeah, I'll probably pick your brains up.
Yes,
yeah. No, that's fine. It's just interesting, because you know, with obviously some employers, if they've gone down the apprenticeship route, they just see apprenticeships, don't they? It's trying to get them to see a different pathway.
Yeah, I'll never understand why we ran the brick T-level. We weren't going to run that, because there's no need for a brick T-level learner at that level, we found. So, but yeah, anyway, that's besides the point. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you.
I would love to hear a little bit about building employer networks. Is that something that, I mean, you know, have you done things differently because of your locality? Have you kind of physically brought employers in? Have you run events using kind of Zoom and online platforms? How have you done that kind of employer engagement angle?
From a childcare perspective, I think Gail touched on this earlier, or education and childcare. Because we've had such success with that over the years, and the amount of placements and hours they all are required to do regardless, we've had no issue getting them into placement at all. In our local area, I'm really concerned about sort of business, the legal side of it. We just have no, and I don't know, I'd love to hear about anyone else when we're piloting the industry placements, but we just have no law employers eager to engage, because they take on graduates. They don't see our students as being ready to get that experience. So that's one massive concern that we have, and I've tried my hardest for the last 3 years. I've had one industry placement in legal as a pilot in the 3 years that I've been doing it. We do get a lot this year. We've had a lot from our digital students, from them going to seek their own placements, which has been really successful, because they're sort of research in the local area. We've done a lot of preparation about research and a placement, travelling to placement this year, following our last year's cohorts, and that's really helped us engage employers. When the students have gone out, we've assisted them with sending emails or how to call them and that sort of thing. We're getting some really positive experience from that, so that has really helped us. That's what I'd say from an employer engagement side. We've also just got our local hospital on board for all of our health science T-level students.
Brilliant.
So that's been amazing, and they've just taken the whole cohort. We've had the same with our construction. But we go back to digital again. I think, yeah, getting the students to go out and find their own placements has been really beneficial for us.
Brilliant.
All of our curriculum areas are running employer advice, kind of employer forums. So they've all inviting key local employers in to talk about our offer across the boards, like T-levels, apprenticeships, and obviously that learner journey. So we're working with, for example, a local company or Screwfix to see how we can support them in terms of retaining talent. So we're working with them at the moment to see if they can take on T-level learners in and then map it across to a higher degree apprenticeship that they would support, that they would fund, so that they get to retain their talent, because a lot of young people leave the area to go away to university and don't come back. So that's kind of, we've talking to employers about what their recruitment problems are and seeing how we can support them to kind of retain that talent coming through. That seems to be quite positive, and we're hoping that will lead to some really good business placements, and obviously really good opportunities for learners moving forward as well. And actually a lot of our students work in their call centre, so it's kind of a win-win, because we'd be using that as a basis at the start and then adding bits to make it relevant for the T-level qualification.
We have found with our engineering employers, because of the nature of their business, they do tend to be further out in the more rural locations and in the villages, which then can present a problem if they're not on a bus route. So we've got a really wonderful employer in Singer Instruments, and they've offered 3 placements, and at the moment we're looking into if we can put on a college minibus to take those students out there and pick them up, just to get them there, because it's such a great offer.
Yeah.
But again, it's just that rurality of the business.
Yeah.
And not on a bus route. And we've just held, actually, we had an apprenticeship and T-level awareness evening last week for students and parents to come in. So that went really well, and there was quite a good buzz in the hall after the presentation about, did a bit of myth busting, and they were, parents seemed really, really interested in the T-level and that industry placement element. So kind of hoping that just through word of mouth as well, and, a lot of parents are employers, that word will spread, and people will be more open to offering placements.
It's awareness, isn't it?
It is, it really, and it's something new, and everyone's wary about trying something new. So
I would just say, on the positive side of it, is we've just had 2 open events, and I've never been so busy talking about T-levels. We've had a really, really good response to T-levels in general. I'm not just saying about the ones that we're offering, because obviously we do only have a select few, but just parents that have even got, their children, they've got younger siblings and things, that are just coming over to find out about what T-levels are. And like you said, they are employers, so as well, they work, most of them work. So I've never seen so many inquiries around T-levels, so it has been good from that aspect.
Good.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that. It's really encouraging.
I definitely agree. I think the momentum's growing for T-levels. Like we're saying, we had loads in our open event. Actually, more interested in those than some of the A-levels. I think there's a bit of a swing for those occupationally relevant, and the industry placement's a big part of it. So it is really good.
Yeah, amazing. That all sounds excellent. Anything else that's worked particularly well, I suppose?
I mean, is the prospect of sort of local join up, is that like a possibility looking forward? Perhaps not now, but kind of when the numbers are scaling up and there are more sort of providers delivering within your area, is that something that you are considering or have sort of started conversations about?
we're quite spread. Where I am, we haven't really got, our nearest local provider would be Strode, I guess, and they're they're a good sort of half an hour trip away, if you like. So we don't tend to cross territory that much. But we do share learners. Potentially it could be something we would look at.
We're also part of the Eastern Colleges group now, so we have Suffolk 1, which are sort of 30 minutes up the road from us. We're now group in terms of sort of work placement team, so we work really closely with them. When they start taking T-levels, it does sort of slightly concern me because we do cross over with learners, so we have some that are in Stowmarket, which is halfway between Bury and Ipswich. We'll also lose BT. I guess that's just from a selfish perspective, because they are still part of us. We are group, so we work really closely together. So we will have to consider that as anything sort of that way. But other than that, we don't really have anything too close to us that I think will have much of an impact on us, apart from that Suffolk one.
Just thinking actually, Louise, because obviously you're Bridgewater Taunton, aren't you? So that's kind of a nearest kind of big town to us. And our council services, who would be a fantastic provider, have all moved over to Taunton.
Yes.
So darn it.
Sorry.
So I know. No, all of our, that's like we could potentially. I know that there's a chap there who I've been working with for blooming years, trying to get all this up and running, and now it's all merged, and so it's gone to the big local town, so that's taken it away from us. So that's still quite a distance. That's, I don't know if it's 25 miles or so to Taunton. And the bus routes there wouldn't be great for learners. But if we got a plethora of placements, then I certainly would be I would be happy to put on travel, a minibus or whatever. But it's just not very often in that situation, unfortunately.
So is there something about if employers are offering a group of placements and if they're offering to take a whole cohort or half the class, that it potentially opens up more opportunities for you funding travel, whereas it's more difficult if it's just one student? It's quite a lot of effort and money for just one placement.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you were getting all of your learners in with one employer, I mean, we are with the hospital, our local hospital, they've taken all our health learners. Well, we're actually not running the health T level now. We postponed it because of the problems. But when we were, we had all our learners going there, and they're still there for their BTEC course, but they were doing, they were all taken on with the hospital. So that was nice. That was a nice, simple one. I do think that's the way ahead.
Absolutely. We're having lots of discussions about developing employer partnerships, and that I know that was it Exeter College had the HEPCO Motion Academy, so all their engineering students have gone to the same employer, and something like that's the aim, I think, to keep it nice and tidy. It's the support for the students, and they're getting a really good, valuable placement experience. And by no means am I undermining the SMEs, because they are our bread and butter. They keep us going. But those larger companies often have the money where they can pay. They'll have someone employed as a placement coordinator who can then, oversee those placements and be that mentor and that supervision. And I think they are more equipped to be able to offer a group of students a placement. And that's something that, we as a college are looking now to build on those local relationships that we have.
The only problem with that, though, is that right now, I mean, we have quite small cohorts in comparison to what we have in our BTEC or what we have seen. So, if we've got 60 students that are doing a T-level, that's a lot, isn't it? So it's having to try and find 6 employers that are going to take or have the capacity for 10 students each or something like that. Right now our cohorts are quite small, so we can work with it, but I think Gail maybe touched on this. I'm concerned for when these cohorts grow larger. And we have this year a lot of, like I said, education and childcare is not a major issue for us, but the cohort in comparison to what we had last year, has almost doubled, if not sort of gone more than that. So it does concern me when these are going to replace these qualifications. What are we going to do? Because currently I have 80 or 90 business students, and the thought of having to get them all industry placements is quite scary. So I think that's something for a rural area is something we have to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Cindy, is there anything else that you wanted to cover and get out of this session?
I'm just having a read at the post-it notes. I think we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? I mean, it's worth directing that question at the colleagues who've attended. Is there anything else that you are keen to tell us about that you haven't perhaps covered yet?
I think probably from my point of view, probably covered everything. I really appreciate this opportunity to, to have kind of our stories listened to, I suppose. And I guess, not to dwell on the stuff that kind of keeps me awake at night, because some of the stuff that is happening with our learners is fabulous, and they're moving on to really fantastic places from this, and we get really good news stories. So, I am really excited about the T-level across the board. Like I said, I think once we just kind of get things off the ground, and I still think in a way we are still recovering a little bit from COVID. Our learners are a little bit vulnerable and things, so that's across the board. That's nothing to do with virality at all. But actually, it's just it's just the distance for our learners to travel to access placements is a barrier, I guess, and that's just a concern across the board, really. I think for me, it's just how we can get our learners to these placements, because sometimes trying to get a student to travel just across town can be quite difficult, let alone going to another town.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's probably that compounding issues point, isn't it? Mental health issues for students is not unique to rural areas, but when a student does struggle with their mental health, actually expecting them to travel, greater distances or have a more arduous commute is something that would impact them more. So it's that kind of compounding point, I suppose.
This is something more generic, but I know that we have had issues around T-levels and universities not taking students on, and also we have had with some engineering employers who work with us closely for the pilot that are concerned that when the T-levels come for their particular area, that they won't then be able to proceed into an apprenticeship, and that's sort of holding us back a bit as well around sort of the next steps of the T-levels and what they're going to be. So yeah, I know it's more generic, but that is definitely a concern. We're having students that are going onto a T-level, then realizing that their university is not going to take them for the degree, so they're going to have to, they've wasted a year because they're moving on to a different qualification in order to get them to university. So that's just something more generalized, but definitely something that crops up.
We can feed that back to the part of the T-level team that work on progression, and I know that they are having conversations literally daily with universities, but we will feed that back because it's always useful to kind of have a reminder that on the ground it's still a problem.
Yeah, it's also the apprenticeship side of it as well, though, because we've had to delay taking on a T-level, doing T-levels in a certain area this year, because we're having employers fighting and saying, but we won't then take them on for a higher apprenticeship or the same level, either or, we're not going to get an apprenticeship out of them, so it's not worth us taking on the industry placement. So yeah,
okay, definitely something that we can take away and feed back to that team. Anything else that it would be useful to discuss? I can stop sharing my screen. No, perfect. I think that might be everything, in which case, and we can give everyone 15 minutes back on a cold and dark Tuesday.
I found that really interesting. Thank you, everybody, for giving up your time today and
Yeah,
responding to the invites. And some of you I've not spoken to for a while, so it was lovely to see you and hear from you again. We are still here. I mean, my team is still here for any of those challenges you may be facing. So just for example, just help Chichester again today with another technical query coming through. So we are still here for you, even though we don't have formal meetings with our wave ones anymore. So just, yeah, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Safe journey home, everybody. And thanks again.
Thanks, Pete.